Good evening. Happy 4th of July, everyone. We have a special treat tonight. We have John Isabella Jr. of Peekskill portraying Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam has become the symbol of the United States. On September 7th, 1813, he officially got the nickname. It's thought that Uncle Sam is based on a man named Samuel Wilson from Troy, New York, who was a supplier of meat to the United States Army. And his food was packed in barrels that were stamped U.S. on them. And the story goes that one of the soldiers asked what the U.S. stood for, and someone said Uncle Sam. And thus Uncle Sam was born. It's appropriate that we do this in Peekskill. Peekskill was a hotbed of activity during the American Revolution. George Washington's headquarters, where he gave Benedict Arnold command of West Point, was located right up on Main Street, just around the corner. Peekskill was burned 3 times during the American Revolution. It was an important supply depot for the Continental Army. So many things happened in Peekskill and its environs. Not just in Peekskill, but Verplank. There were forts all over the place. You can go to Fort Montgomery, where there's a restoration of the fort there. If you go to Fort Hill Park in Peekskill, you can still see the readouts from the fort that existed there. Without any further ado, I'll introduce Uncle Sam, who is going to read the Declaration of Independence. Uncle Sam.
Thank you, Paul, for that historical summary of Peekskill and its role in our great nation. So, good evening, everyone. And isn't it great that parades and fireworks are back in Peekskill this year after a 3-year layoff? So anyway, as we celebrate this upcoming 4th of July weekend, sure, it's wonderful that we have our parades and fireworks back, but 2 key components that we celebrate this special holiday in our nation's history. And while we do need to celebrate, we must also remember that the 4th of July is not just about parades and fireworks. July 4th is Independence Day, the birth of our great nation, the United States of America. And this year, 2022, our country celebrates 246 years of independence from British rule. This Declaration of Independence, adopted on July 4th, 1776 by our founding fathers, marked a pivotal moment in American history. The Second Continental Congress announced the separation of the 13 American colonies from Great Britain and the creation of a new nation in America. And that's why today, this weekend, we should all remember how great it is to be in America, and to live in a free country. Sure, the politics in America can be divided and very heated. We see it every day. But because we live in the greatest country in the world, we can all express our opinions and viewpoints regardless of our political affiliation or ideology, whether we're Democrat, Republican, conservative, or liberal. Today, we are all Americans. And it is now my honor to read this Declaration of Independence as it was written 246 years ago. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient suffrage of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused to assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended by their operation till his assent shall be ordained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attain them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from their depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with many firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have refused to, or have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for the purposes of obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and rising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislators. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civic power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment or any murders which they commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for depriving us in many cases beyond the seas to be tried of pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English law in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule in these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislators and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burned our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at the time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, dissolution, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous times, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare in an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting the attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them to the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must, therefore, acquiesce to the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, peace friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies and the right ought to be free and independent states, and that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Fellow Americans, these words, as penned by our forefathers 246 years ago, set the model of which we live in this great land of ours, free to express our thoughts, our opinions, to practice religion, to air political viewpoints, no matter what they may be. And so today, it is so important that we put our differences aside and come together as one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. God bless America, and happy 4th of July. God bless America.